Hey ladies! Welcome to our second week of our new study, our ladies Bible study that we are beginning. Seamless, understanding the Bible as one complete story is the study we're going through. I want to remind you really quick before we dig back in that I have currently, I think I have 3 books available. The full study guide that has 5 days a week of questions and fill in the blank things and stuff. I'm going to show you, like for example, this is day 4. This is where we're starting. No, this is not where we're starting, but this is, we'll be talking about this this week. And so it's that and then one more page. So that's a day's worth of reading and whatever, looking at. And I also want to say that we will be going through this study slower than what it is written. It's written as a 6 or 7 week study, and we're going to take probably, I'm guessing, approximately twice that long. So cut that in half, page and a half a day, approximately. So if you would like one of these books, I know already I've heard from one person who ordered her own copy. Well, 2 people, 3 people maybe. I'm like, oh yeah, remembering other people. Several people have ordered their own copies. If you would like a copy, please don't feel bad taking advantage of one of these copies that we have. They're available, they're free of charge. They're first come, first served, so if you would like one, let me know and we can figure it out. I'll have them at church Sunday, May 31st, which you may be watching this before church and you may be watching this after church. I'm not sure when it will go out. Today's Saturday. So I'll have them at church. I'll try to catch people and see if they want one, but let me know. Other than that, we can figure it out is what I'm trying to say. Last week, I just kind of introduced the study, and then I mentioned that this book is a journey through the Bible, the story of the Bible, basically. And I mentioned that she uses little pictures or icons to help us remember our way. They're at the bottom of the pages down here. And I showed you the first one last week, and I forgot to show you the other 2 that we talked about. So I'm going to mention quickly again. It is broken into 30 little pictures, but I probably should have said, and this is easier to think about, it's broken into 6 main sections. Those are the beginning. In the beginning, that's where we started. The patriarchs, Exodus and the Promised Land is the 3rd section. 4 is the kingdoms and the prophets. 5, the Messiah. 6, the letters. So those are the 6 basic sections, and then within each one of those sections there are 5 little pictures to help you think of 5 main things that happen in that section. And so I printed out this. I confuse myself every time I look at the screen because as I'm recording it's flipped backwards and I can't read what this says. Technology fixes it for me though. I just need to remind myself. The beginning. This is what we're talking about. And so last week we talked about creation. Here it is, the globe. We talked about just accept what the Bible says at face value. Don't feel like you have to bring preconceived ideas, whatever, into it. Just take what God says. Believe that God can do what he says he did, and he did what he said he did. The second one is the creation of man and woman, Adam and Eve. And then this 3rd one is the fall. This is a little serpent. I'm going to put them up there just so you can see them. The fall, which we started talking about last week, we said that is what is commonly given as a name to the first sin, the first choice to not follow what God had said and to follow what I want to do instead. We call that sin. This is commonly referred to as the fall. And so we're going to talk just quickly about the results of the fall. We're still in the very beginning. We're like, the Bible doesn't tell us how many days passed between creation and when all these things happened, but we're way in the beginning. So we have not made very much ground, but I want to remind you, as we said last week, we're laying the foundation for the whole rest of the Bible. If we can't believe the beginning, that God very specifically spells out for us what he did, then why should we believe the rest of it? So on one hand, we're laying the foundation of just taking God at his word. And on the other hand, we're laying the foundation for a lot of things that are going to happen, and a lot of reasons behind things are, a lot of the explanations for those are found here in the beginning. So we talked about Adam and Eve choosing to eat the fruit of the tree that God had told them, the one tree God had told them not to eat from. And we know that after their disobedience, they knew something had happened. We all are familiar with that feeling of doing something and then you just have that sick feeling in the pit of your stomach, like, why did I do that? Now what? And Adam and Eve's response to that now what feeling was that they ran and hid. They became aware of their nakedness. The Bible tells us they sewed aprons or coverings for themselves. They were fearful of what would happen. They hid from God. And we hear God in Genesis 3 calling out to them. Let me find that in my Bible. You would think it would be really easy to find because it's way at the beginning. Too close to the beginning to find. Genesis 3:9. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? Where are you, Adam? Clue, God didn't need information. It's not that God wasn't sure where Adam and Eve were. He was not trying to figure out, let me see if I can possibly find them. Oh, now I don't know what happened. What shall I do now? This isn't God. What do you think he was getting at? And we'll talk in a second here. But why would God ask a question? Don't we do that with our children or whoever? Ask questions to get people to think. Ask questions to lead someone to an answer. A question isn't always just a search for information. It can be leading someone to the point where they need to be. And maybe that was the case here with God. Another thing to think about is God wasn't asking them to identify, here I am, here's my GPS coordinates. He wasn't asking them to identify their location as much as he was asking them to identify the condition of their heart. There had been perfect fellowship with God before they chose to sin. And then suddenly they're afraid of God, they're hiding from him, they're ashamed. And imagine as you read this and as you think about this, that God is asking you, where are you spiritually? Are you hiding from God? Are you ashamed of what you've done before God? Are you doubting that what you can read in the Bible is really true? Are you doubting that you're even going to learn something from this study? Just be honest with God. Adam and Eve had to face up to what they had done. They had to be honest in their answer. And like we said, it wasn't that God didn't know. He just wanted them to acknowledge. And sometimes that's half the battle with us. God knows the answer to the question of where are you? Where am I spiritually? He doesn't need information from us, but half of the battle is just admitting to him where we are and what the condition of our heart is, and admitting that we've done wrong, that we have made the wrong choice. We followed our own desires instead of following God's desires. He knows where we are. He knew where they were. He wants from us the same thing he wanted from Adam and Eve. He wanted them to come to him instead of hiding and covering and listening to Satan's lies. It's not, I try not to fall into the trap or whatever you want to call it of thinking through what ifs, because it's impossible to know what if this, what if that. We don't know. We don't know what would have happened. But what if, when Satan had tempted them, they had gone to God to just check in first? Hey, God, I remember you said this. What's going on? This guy is saying this. Can you clarify here? If they had done that, what if, like, how are you going to answer that question? Everything would have been different because we know everything changed with their choice to follow Satan's lie instead of what God had asked of them. Adam answers God in verse 10, and he says, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself. I feel like that's a good start. Man, God, I'm so afraid because of what I did. I was hiding. This is where I heard you coming, and I was ashamed. I was afraid. He starts out right away admitting, man, I really messed up. And I know it. I know I messed up. But then the thing that he does next in verse 12 is not so great of a continuation of the path he started. The man said, the woman whom thou gavest to be with me, she gave me of the tree, and I did eat. So he gives an explanation for his behavior. We know Adam ate of the fruit of the tree because Eve gave it to him, and he wants to make sure the woman who you gave me, God, basically it's her fault and it's your fault because she did it and you're the one who gave her to me. He's actually blaming Eve, and he's also blaming God for what he did. Eve, who is the next one down the line, she says, the serpent beguiled me or tricked me, and I did eat. The creation that you made, God, he actually tricked me. So I'm sort of actually an innocent victim here because he tricked me. So I can't really be held accountable for that, basically, right? But we know the truth. Eve was not a helpless victim. She made a choice. And we are not helpless victims when we choose to do wrong, to go away from God. We always have the choice to believe what God says in his word or to believe a lie from Satan. And sometimes we make the wrong choice there. God's next thing that he says in verse 15, his next response is an important verse. And we've talked about it in church. We've probably talked about it in previous classes. But this is the very first mention of the gospel, the good news that Jesus is going to come and pay the payment for sin. Now, it's been pointed out, and I think it's worth repeating, that this is a very subtle reference, I'm going to call it. There is no full spelling out of all the details. This is like a hint, the very first hint. Verse 15 says, this is God talking, I will put enmity, or like make you enemies, between thee and the woman. He's talking to the snake, the serpent, which we know was Satan disguised as a serpent. He says, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. What are we talking about? God's talking to a snake, and he's telling him that women aren't going to like snakes, and somebody's going to get their head bruised, and somebody's going to get their heel bruised. What? It's, like I said, it's a vague reference, but if you think about it, it talks about the seed of Satan and the seed of the woman. And without going into too much detail, think about, if you get your heel bruised, that is painful, hard to walk, but it's a temporary condition. Your heel's gonna heal up, your heel's gonna heal, and you are gonna be fine. Typically, a heel injury is not deadly, unless you're talking about Achilles, an Achilles heel, but we're not talking about Greek mythology. But when you get your head crushed, that's kind of a big deal. And God is saying the woman's seed, or the woman's descendant, is going to get its heel bruised. It's going to be injured by the snake. It's going to have trouble. It's going to have trials. But the snake will get its head crushed by the descendant of the woman. And of course, we know from our looking back, hindsight is 2020 kind of perspective, that's talking about Jesus. But God is saying, you've put yourself into a condition, into a state by turning away from me, where you're going to struggle with sin and you're going to struggle with Satan, and it's not going to be fun. But I'm telling you, this is a temporary condition. You're going to heal from that. And Satan will be crushed eventually. He will find himself totally defeated. And if you think about a snake, venomous snakes have their little poison packs right here in their heads. The ability to injure and to crush will be totally taken away from the snake when he is crushed. The question is, does this promise from God eliminate earthly repercussions of sin? When we disobey God, does this promise mean that's fine, you can disobey him and there won't be any consequences? I think it's obvious to anybody who's alive on the earth that that is not the case. God is not eliminating consequences of sin here on earth. And if you aren't sure if he's not eliminating that, read the next 4 verses, verses 16 through 19. That was Genesis 3:15. Genesis 3:16 talks about pain in childbirth, talks about how there will be conflict between the desire of the woman to be in charge and the desire of the man to be in charge. Verse 17 talks about how Adam is going to have a hard time working and bringing fruit and vegetables out of the ground. It's going to be hard work. It's not going to be easy for him. The sweat and the thorns and the thistles, and how they will return to dust. At the very end it says, dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. Talking about physical death. Their body will be decaying. We won't continue in the perfect bodies with Adam and Eve were made with. So if you're questioning if he's taking away the consequences of sin, he makes it clear he's not. He just goes on right after that to list some of them. But you even see in the next verses that the continuing generations are affected, not just Adam and Eve, but you read about their children, and very quickly you read about the first murder, a brother killing his own brother. You read about more children, and you read about, that was Cain and Abel. Cain murdering Abel, his brother. You read about Seth, another son that's born to Adam and Eve, and Cain gets married, and Seth gets married, and starts talking about their kids, and maybe the thought enters your mind, where did their wives come from? If you read Genesis 5:4, you get the answer. The days of Adam after he had begotten Seth were 800 years. That's a long time to live. And he begat sons and daughters. He had other kids. This study guide points out there were not a lot of choices on eHarmony or your small group Bible study. Youth group didn't have many options to choose from. They chose from the people who were there, siblings. Now we know that that's a bad idea because of genetic mutations and things, but these people were the height of the human race. They didn't have gene pool issues like we have these days. And that's where they got their spouses from in those days, brothers and sisters. One of the descendants from Seth, who was born to Adam and Eve after Cain killed Abel, one of Seth's descendants was named Enoch, and if you're reading through the genealogy, you will have seen the name Enoch already as one of Cain's children. And yes, it's the same name. No, it's not the same person. But Enoch is mentioned in Genesis 5:22 through 24. He's described a little bit. Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 365 years, and Enoch walked with God. A nice description of someone's life, don't you think? We've read about a lot of messed up stuff happening right from the very beginning, and then we read about Enoch who walked with God. And it doesn't give us a lot of details about what did that mean exactly. But he was a person who, when they described him, they said, oh yeah, I know Enoch. He walked with God. Wouldn't that be nice to be a description of our lives? Unfortunately, Enoch's description was not characteristic of everybody as a whole, and we know that because in the very next chapter, Genesis 6, verse 5, we see God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing and the fowl of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. We see conditions have gone downhill enough, quickly enough, and to so extensive a point enough that God, in his wisdom, looks around and says, the best thing to do right now, knowing that this is just going to keep getting worse, knowing that I created the perfect versions of man and woman, and this is what they're doing with my perfection that I gave them, the best choice right now is to wipe out the creation that I made. And this sounds aggressive, doesn't it? Doesn't this sound drastic? Maybe we think, well, if I were God, boop, that's a problem. We're not God. And if we think it sounds aggressive and dramatic, we should be reminded that there is nothing passive about God, the holy God who created the world. There's nothing weak about him, nothing wishy-washy about him. He is good. The Bible is clear that he is good, but he is just. And he has a high standard. And people were violently ignoring him. We certainly didn't read everything that it says, but the descriptions of the way that people were extremely antagonistic toward God, and he came to a decision that we feel like is drastic, but we're not God. We just finished a whole study about characteristics of God and who he is and what he's like in ways that we are not and we cannot be. And we need to remember that when we place our human perspective and human expectations on God, we're wrong to do that. He is separate from us. He is sovereign. We talked about how he is sovereign, meaning he's in charge. He can do what he wants to with what is his. He is also love. The Bible says he is love. That is who he is. It's not, he doesn't choose to love at times. He is love. And so when we can't understand what he's doing, we have to trust that it is loving, even if we don't see how it's loving. He cannot go against his nature. God does not go against who he is and his character. And in the Bible, honestly, I feel a little bit bad for people in these days because they didn't have such a complete picture as we have in the Bible. And when I say complete picture, I don't mean we know everything there is to know about God. And that's another thing that refers to our study we just finished about his incomprehensibility. We can't understand everything about him because he's beyond us. But he has given us a big, broad picture where we can trust in his goodness and his love. I have this song running through my head right now. I know that you are good. I know that you are kind. I know you're so much more than what I leave behind. When we choose God over whatever else it might be, he's given us enough information to know that we can trust him. And we haven't, in this part of our study, you might be feeling like, I don't feel like we have that much information about God, actually. And you're right. We haven't gotten very far through the Bible, but the more time you spend in his word and the more that you walk with God like Enoch does, the more you get to know that he is trustworthy. He can be trusted to do what's right. He can be trusted to make good decisions. And we have gotten all the way to Genesis chapter 6, and that's as far as we're going right now. The fourth picture on this little chart is this little boat here. We're talking about the flood. I thought we would talk about it this week, but we've already been going almost 25 minutes, so I'm going to cut it short. But if you're thinking to yourself, yeah, you said we're going to take longer than 6 weeks in this study. We're probably going to take about 60, 100 weeks at the rate we're going. We're not going to go through all of the sections this slowly, but we are laying a foundation. As I said at the beginning, we're laying the foundation of explanations and reasons behind what happens and what people do. And we're also laying the foundation of believing what God said with a section that honestly a lot of people dismiss as fairy tales. Adam and Eve, those are fairy tales. The flood, that's such a cute children's story, but we know that didn't actually happen. I beg to differ. The Bible doesn't put fairy tales and tell us that they're true. So we're talking about true history. We're talking about real people. We're talking about a real God, and a God who we can trust to make good decisions even when we don't understand the decisions. So that's it for today. I hope you will join in again next week. We are going to talk about the flood and the Tower of Babel and Job next week. So we're just going to do it. We're just going to get through it. But I hope you had a great week. Please contact me if you'd like to talk further about any of this stuff. If you have any questions, if you'd like a book, one of the copies of the workbooks, or whatever. And I'm curious to see if anybody noticed that I'm poking fun at myself a little bit with this pink paper. And also, not that I've been showing you this, but I'm going to show you my pink highlighting in my dog chewed book. If anybody knows in what way that is poking fun at myself, give me a comment and let me know, because I'm just curious. Sometimes I just wonder if anybody notices the weird choices that I make. So let me know if you think you know in what way I am making fun of myself with my pink stuff going on in this study. And we'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.